In the fall of 2010, I decided to go back to college. I was a single mom of 3 boys, but they were all in school now and me going back was finally possible. The school I went to is a regional campus to a very large university and located in a neighborhood that is known for crime, meth, heroin, prostitution, etc. But it was only a 20-minute drive from my home and I didn't feel unsafe about going there. The first day and first class were intimidating. I didn't know anyone and was a lot older than most of the students. I was 28 at the time. I sat down in the back of the room at a table, and a few minutes later, a lady who was around my age sat down next to me. She was very skinny, smelled like cigarettes, greasy hair, sunken eyes, but she started to talk to me and seemed normal enough. She started off the conversation telling me that she chose to sit next to me because I was wearing the prettiest blouse in the room. Strange, but as an awkward person, I leave a lot of leeway for people to say or do awkward things before I think too deep into them. She didn't have a backpack, any books, a pen, notebook, nothing. She said her financial aid hadn't come through yet, but she didn't want to fall behind on classes and asked could she share my book. I agreed and gave her a pen and paper also. After the class, she asked if I would mind going to the library with her so she can scan some of the pages to take home. I agreed and we started to head to the library. She stops, looks at her phone and says her son just texted and needs her to come home to do something. She asks if I'll come with her. I tell her I have another class shortly and can't go with her. I ask if she still wants to go to the library first. She says no, that she has to go and get to her son, but really can't go alone. I keep telling her I cannot go with her, and she starts crying. At this point, we were in a common area outside and the parking lot was to one side and the library to the other. I tell her I need to go to the library and she's welcome to come, talk, whatever she needs, but I have to go. I didn't like being outside away from people with this woman anymore and was trying to get back to the busier area. She gets really upset, starts screaming, basically says fuck you to me. She may have actually said that. I can't remember how the interaction went exactly because I was frozen in confusion by how quickly she transitioned from friendly, then to crying and scared, and now screaming in my face a slew of hateful and angry things. I turned around to start walking to the library and called my friends so that I would have someone aware if this lady tried anything more than just screaming. I get to the library vestibule and watch her through the glass doors. She is standing at the parking lot, then a car pulls up with a man in it, and he is obviously upset with the woman. They're arguing, but I cannot hear them from inside the vestibule. Eventually, she gets in the car and leaves with him. The next day, I was dreading class because I didn't know what this woman's attitude would be like. But she wasn't there that next day. In the end, she never came back to class. I didn't know her name, or at the time how to look at the class roster. But looking back, I'm fairly certain she was not enrolled at the school at all, and for whatever reason, was trying to get me to leave with her. I wish I knew her intentions, but at the same time, I'm glad I never had to find out.
I transferred colleges between my freshman and sophomore years. I didn't know anyone at my new school, so I decided to rush a sorority just to go to some parties and meet some new people. I did a lot of both, and was asked to join 2 sororities. They were not the super popular ones, but I'm not a super popular girl. Short, a little chubby, geeky, mouthy, you get the picture. So I go through Rush and join one. All the Greek houses have their meetings on the same night, and they all go to the same bar to hang out after. It was on the corner just off campus, so a lot of college kids hung out there. I met him there. Super tall, like 6'8", nice looking and seemed to be a nice guy. He was a law enforcement major, and I was studying to be a paralegal. Perfect. We struck up a conversation, exchanged info, and so on. Pretty soon he called for a date, and we ended up going to a midnight showing of Quadrophenia, and started going out pretty regularly after that. As I said, I joined the sorority to meet people, and our house was partnered with a brother frat, and we'd have parties together and so on. We were at the frat house hosting a Halloween event when he showed up. His parents were both professors at the school and were on a joint sabbatical in Turkey. There had been a huge earthquake in Turkey that day, and he couldn't contact them. He was freaking out. I did my best to comfort him, and he hung around long enough to make me and the frat guys holding the party uncomfortable. Finally, he went back to his apartment to wait for news. I promised that I'd check in later. Oddly, he never said any more about them. We dated for a few months, and I began to get pretty uncomfortable with him. He was very possessive, very handsy, and I still wanted to experience the new school, the new town, and new friends. He really didn't want me to do any of that, so I finally broke it off with him. Since he knew I went to the meat market on meeting night, I stopped going. He spotted my best friend there and literally picked her up and carried her out of the bar, demanding to know where I was. Thankfully, she didn't tell him anything, and her boyfriend made a huge scene and then scared him off. She and I both took pains not to run into him. I was living in the sorority house, in a room that had 2 windows on 2 sides, so I was pretty exposed. My big sister in the sorority also knew the guy I had gone out with, and started telling me that she heard that he was threatening me. He was talking about coming to the house, breaking in the windows, raping and killing me. Did I say he's 6'8" and I'm 5'2"? Yeah, I got pretty freaked out about all this. And she was very specific with what he'd said he was going to do, and I was beginning to get really scared. It was coming up on the last few weeks of school, and I ended up moving home and commuting almost 2 hours each way for my finals. I later quit that school and never went back, even though I really liked it there, and was elected president of my sorority and loved the town. And no, if you're wondering stupidly, I didn't report any of this. That summer, I applied for a job at the new music venue inside town, and I was offered a job in concessions. Then later found out he was in security at that same venue. No way. I declined the job and have never been back to that venue since. So, to the huge, creepy wannabe rapist, let's never ever meet again.
This is a story of my brief friendship with a guy that damn near stalked me, and I'm sharing it for some closure, I think. I started my freshman year of college at a university in my hometown. That's pretty nice. I'm not going to share too much about it. It has a smaller amount of students, but enough that you don't really run into people often. I lived on campus. I was only 17 at the time. I had Tinder, of course, as I was fresh out of a relationship and looked to experience new things in college. I matched with this boy, Asher, who seemed nice enough. Pretty socially awkward, but I never really minded because I have anxiety issues myself, and I'm really sympathetic to it. Because of that, I ignored a lot of warning signs I shouldn't have. We texted for a while. He seemed really nice and caring. He wanted to know a lot about me, which I wasn't too keen on sharing, but I told him the basics, so we texted kind of regularly. He lived on campus as well and invited me to hang out. At the time, things didn't seem too sketchy, so I was completely down. When I first met him, that's when things started to get uncomfortable. We hung out in his dorm, which was pretty standard overall. I got cozy with him on his couch. I'd say almost cuddling, but not quite. Still really standard. When we started talking more, I realized how uncomfortable things really were. He kept making comments that just put me off, but I tried to ignore them. Things like, "I've never cuddled anyone before. Sorry if I'm doing it wrong." And so many comments about how he already liked me and wanted me to stay forever. Weird word choice, but whatever. He's just trying to be nice. I'll let him down easy. I ended that hangout pretty quickly for some fake excuse and went right back to my room. He kept texting me and professing how much he was into me. I told him sorry, but I'm not looking for any kind of relationship, so I did not want to keep things romantic. A bad lie, but I'm very non-confrontational and didn't want to be mean. That's when things started to really get weird. He sent me this long paragraph saying about how it was okay that I didn't want a relationship now and that he'd wait for me and save his virginity for me. We had never even talked about anything sexual, and I had never even told him that I liked him or flirted back. I just never turned him down. It was one of the creepiest messages I've ever received. Unfortunately, that was just the start of the weird things to come. He wouldn't leave me alone, even though I kept trying to de-escalate things, and I kept running into him all over campus. I wasn't sure how he suddenly was nearby when my classes ended, and I wasn't sure why suddenly we'd both be in the dining hall at the same times, even though I hadn't changed my regular routine, but I just tried to brush it off. Definitely a mistake. I ended up turning him down completely because I was getting creeped out, and I couldn't figure out how he wasn't understanding that I didn't want anything romantic or sexual with him. He started guilt-tripping me, telling me about how he was going to kill himself and no one was ever going to love him. I've been in a manipulative relationship in the past, and I recognized that behavior right away and shut it down. I told him I couldn't be friends with him, and in my head, that was that. He didn't reply for a while, but when he did, all hell broke loose. I was luckily out of town at the time for a concert, so that made me feel a lot better. He went off, sending me paragraph after paragraph about how horrible of a person I was and how I was a slut and needed to get put in my place, etc. Regular nice guy things. I couldn't handle that. I just ignored it. Then, once the regret set in, he made it his mission to win my love however possible. He apologized profusely, told me how he couldn't be alone and I was his only friend, and how much he loved me. Whatever. Terrible, but I didn't care about that. Then, I guess to prove his dedication, he did the creepiest thing yet. First, he told me he was outside of my room. We did not live in the same dorm building, and you can't get into the buildings unless you live there. I don't know who let him in. I wasn't there, and my roommate was out, so that was okay. I texted him back at that point and told him to leave and how wrong and creepy that was, and he pulled out his last resort. He just sends me a screenshot of my contact in his phone. On Apple devices, you can fill in tons of information and have a notes section. Everything was entirely full. He knew my home address, my room number on campus, my parents' and brothers' names, my pets' names, my schedule. It was terrifying because I'm a fairly private person. My Instagram is my only social media and I do not share that much on it. I don't think I'll ever find out how he discovered all of that about me. I blocked him on everything right away and reported him to the school. The school did nothing at all. I still see him on campus and he still tries to approach me when he sees me. I always duck and run. It's worked so far. So, to the terrifying Tinder match who may still be following me around to this day, let's not meet again.
This happened about 2 years ago in my second year in university, and I was 20 at the time. For context, I'm French, so if anything's weird about how I describe uni, that's why. At the time, I lived in a government-owned apartment building on the 3rd floor. My direct neighbor was my younger sister, who was studying in the same university as I. One other thing important to the story is that I'm disabled. My right leg is useless after an accident I had when I was 13, and I now suffer from a debilitating chronic pain, to a degree that keeps me bedridden and nonverbal, unless I take a twice-a-day dosage of prescribed morphine. All of that is important details, so just bear with me. When I take my medication, I'm able to leave my bed. On the worst days, I have to either use a wheelchair or a cane to get around. On top of that, as you might guess, morphine is a very strong pain medication. It screws with your visual and hearing perception. It makes you sleepy and dizzy, and it lessens your reflexes. It numbs your nervous system, makes you paranoid. You get the idea. At the time, I'd only been taking morphine for less than 6 months, after 10 years of various other pain medication, and I was still dealing with the side effects in full force. So for me, that meant mainly auditory hallucinations, sleepiness, dizziness, as well as bad reflexes and nerve responses. At that point, I had gotten used to hearing stuff that wasn't actually there. Mostly just clapping noises, clicking noises, just small stuff. I never actually hallucinated human voices. That night, I had gone out to the center of the city to meet up with friends. This was a very rare occasion for me, and I do mean rare. I don't go out more than once every 2 months or so, for multiple reasons that my friends, bless them, understood perfectly. Morphine means no drinking, so that's half the fun removed immediately from the start. Despite the very useful nature of the meds, I was still and still am in a tremendous amount of pain, especially if I stand for more than a couple of minutes. And I was sure to do a lot of that at a bar. Plus, walking back from the bus stop to my building, it's about a 5-minute walk. But I went anyway. For a few days, there had been rumors going around about a group that was going around kidnapping people from my uni. From memory, 2 girls had disappeared already, and it was suspected that a blue van was the vehicle used. Those reports were circulating on our major groups, and on the uni's groups as well, about the same details each time. But my friends and I were very skeptical, mostly about the blue van, simply because we didn't believe the van would still be running around if the information had spread enough, and we were hearing about it on Facebook, so, I wasn't really thinking about any of that as I came back from the bar around midnight. I got onto the bus, and there were only 3 people there, and none got out at my bus stop. Now bear in mind that I was in an extreme amount of pain, so much so that my vision was blurring out on the edges, and I was swaying a bit from side to side, trying to minimize the weight being put on my leg. And on top of that, I had just taken a fast-working morphine dose to help me get through the 5 minutes walking back to my building. And unlike my twice-a-day high dose, those pills I could take to my discretion whenever I needed a quick relief. The downside, however, of those very practical pills is that it basically knocks you out in 30 minutes or so. You get so sleepy you can barely keep your eyes open. And basically, you're high for about 20 minutes or so before either passing out or potentially getting through it, as it gets better after a while. I got off the bus. On my right is a parking lot in front of a bakery with a lot of cars. It's normal because there are a lot of government-owned student flats around that block, and that's where most of them park, so I'm not concerned. The road I take is straight from where the bus dropped me off. For the whole walk before my building is to the right, a couple of parking spots in front of it, and a wheelchair slope going to a magnetic door. You need your magnetic student ID to open the door, then a key to the specific door to your building. As I walk by the parking lot, I see movement in the corner of my eye, but since I'm half out of it from pain and meds, I don't turn to look at it. I hear a noise and just assume I'm hallucinating, so I keep walking. But then, the streetlights reflect on a car window, and I don't know why that specifically made me turn around. My brain was catching on to some weird stuff. So I briefly look to the side and I see an old, beat up white car, pretty long and low to the ground. On the driver's seat is an Algerian man in his mid-50s, the neighborhood being half students, half France-born Algerian. And the thing that gives me pause is more the fact that there's someone awake in the front seat of a car at 1 a.m. But again, I'm out of it, so I just don't question it. I don't even stop walking because at this point, my only thought is, put one foot in front of the other. There you go. You're almost there, and you're almost done with the pain. Literally all of my attention, all my focus was on putting one foot in front of the other because of that debilitating pain. I walked past the small roundabout to my left, still going straight, when I heard a car start. I don't know why that was the thing that slapped me in the face, but suddenly, I was worried. My heart was beating fast. Probably half the meds and half the fear. But also, I was well aware that morphine tends to make me paranoid, so I tried to calm myself down. I see the headlights coming from behind me, drawing a long shadow in front of me. In a second, I run through the calculations. I'm still about 300 meters from my building. I need to get my ID out and open the door. A slow, automatic, magnetic door. I can't run. I can barely walk. I'm up to my head in morphine. It's the middle of the night. I'm alone with no residential building close enough to hear a scream. And that's when I start to panic. I'm right to do so. The car catches up with me and slows down to my walking speed. I notice the man isn't alone in the car anymore. Someone is in the passenger seat. There's also movement in the back. But I don't turn my head because I try to pretend I didn't notice them slowing down. I had my earphones in with no music, as I didn't turn it back on after the bus ride. I just keep walking, hoping with everything I have that they'll leave me alone. I'm trying to walk faster, but I'm in so much pain a few tears fall down. And I can hear they're calling for my attention, but not exactly what they're saying. Finally, I see the lane going up to my building. I take my backpack off and shove my hand down in the front pocket, fumbling because I'm nervous. And I can't feel my fingers, and I'm shaking like crazy, and I can't find my ID. At that point, I'm close to a panic attack. My heart is beating so fast and I'm feeling close to fainting from the combined pain and terror. I turn to face the wheelchair slope when I see out of the corner of my eye that the car is stopped abruptly right next to the slope. And now the car door is slamming open. I don't know how I did it because I was so close to fainting, but I managed to run the last 10 foot to the door, slap my ID on the reader, yelling at the door to open faster. I could hear people running behind me. The door finally opened enough for me to slip in, and I slammed it shut behind me. I heard the men run into the door with a loud noise, and then them cursing and yelling things at me. I didn't stick around to hear what they had to say. I fumbled with my keys to the point of almost dropping them before opening the door to my flat. I got inside on shaky legs, and as soon as I closed the door behind me, I dropped to the floor and had the worst panic attack of my life. When I managed to put myself and my things back together, and then painstakingly climbed the 3 flights of stairs, I crawled into my sister's flat and woke her up telling her the entire story. She later told me that I was deathly pale, so much that I scared her enough that she offered me to share her single bed that night. I was too messed up to refuse. The worst part is, this isn't the end of the story. My sister went out to the bars a lot more than I did, as she's able-bodied and drop-dead gorgeous. About 3 weeks later, she called me in the middle of the night as she was coming back from a bar. She had seen the exact same car I described in the parking lot at the bus stop. She didn't stop to see if there was anyone else inside. She just reacted and sprinted to our building. Of course, she was a lot faster than my drugged up, disabled ass, so she made it to the door where I was waiting for her, having it open from the inside just as the car stopped in the lane. After that, we left a note on our flat's complex door to explain everything to other people, posted about it on every university group we knew of, and we contacted the police, who helpfully told us they could do nothing without catching them within the act itself. But they'd probably send someone to patrol, as they'd matched reports they had gotten that sparked the whole blue van rumors in the first place. In the following year it took to finish my degree, neither me nor my sister saw those men or that car again. But we still hear from people with the same kind of story from other parts of the city. As far as we can tell, they're still active. And 2 years later, I'm still really messed up about it.
This happened when I was a junior/senior in college. I knew John through my intro creative writing class. He always sat across from me and complimented me on my beautiful writing style, my clothes, my hair, my everything. At first I liked it. I was young, easily impressed, and a cute boy was telling me how awesome I was. After the first few classes, it started to get old. He would ask me out on dates, then act offended when I told him I was seeing someone. He would still do it, even after I told him to stop. He even wrote a poem about how awesome my hair was, which seemed weird to me. All of his stories involved a beautiful punk girl named Danny who was in love with him. I went by Annie at the time. John was eventually moved to another class, and I thought, this is the end of it. I didn't see John for weeks. My dorm room was on the first floor. I was sitting on the bed when someone tapped on my window. I opened the blinds to see John standing there. He asked me to let him in. I got the RA. John did it another time, in the middle of the night. The RA let me move to a dorm on the second floor. When I left for the summer, I thought about not coming back, but I had a year left and I wanted to graduate with my friends. I changed my hair back to brown, cut it short, and bought new clothes. Part of it was to update my wardrobe and look for potential jobs. Another was to make sure John couldn't find me in a crowd if he tried. I went back and a lot of people didn't recognize me. I was in a whole new dorm. Classes kept me busy all day, and I didn't see John until 3 weeks before I was set to graduate. I was ordering coffee in the student store when I heard someone call my name. John was standing there, looking like someone murdered his beloved dog in front of him. "Your hair!" he said, sounding shocked. "Why would you do that to your beautiful hair? Your hair was the one thing I loved about you," he said. "Now you look like everyone else." I shrugged, told him to leave me alone. He just stood there, shocked, until finally storming out. He shouted over his shoulder, "This is not how it was supposed to go." I never saw John again.
I'm an 18-year-old female, and I've been stalked quite a few times in my life, but thankfully, most of the perpetrators were annoying rather than scary. Though, these two individuals never got to full bloom into stalker mode, due to the fact that I moved out of state. They were easily the creepiest individuals I'd ever met. I'd began attending community college, and in an effort to make friends, joined an anime club. Once a month, we'd scrape together enough money for pizza and soda, reserve a room in the library, and spend the entire day watching everyone's favorites. Everything was great until the second meeting. We watched Princess Mononoke and Kiki's Delivery Service and some other similar movies. Then Chad put in the last movie of the day. It was an animated softcore porn, and none of us knew what to do. We were all kind of socially awkward. He'd sat through our movies quietly and politely. Were we all supposed to do the same? We'd spent the hour and 20 minutes red-faced and casting each other horrified looks, all while Chad watched the porn with rapt attention. Finally it was over and he turned around. "What'd you guys think?" he asked. He was looking directly at me, and this was the first time I noticed that I was the only female in the anime club. Trying to be polite, I made a huge mistake. It was, interesting. I meant to convey his choice was interesting because we'd all brought in Disney movies, but he took it to mean it was fascinating. From that day on, he showed up everywhere I went on campus. The second I entered any sort of common room, there he was with his laptop, trying to show me more anime porn, seating himself away, way too close to me, so that we would both lean into a screen and watch it. Each time I would tell him, I don't really like this show, as politely as I could, and move to another table, but he would move right back, uncomfortably close to me, and assure me that I would get into the story if I just watched. One day, he sat down next to me and pulls out a notebook to show me a drawing. It looks like a creepy robot uterus. Hoping I'm wrong, I ask what it is. It's a creepy robot uterus. He's writing a book about an AI sex toy that invades lady parts and turns them into ravening sex fiends, willing to do whatever and anything for the D. He wants my opinions on his story. I told him that really wasn't my kind of story and tried to move again. He followed and began asking really inappropriate questions in the name of quote-unquote research. Thankfully at this point, Vincent, the boy who brought me into the anime club, noticed that Chad was following me from table to table throughout the lunchroom, as I turned ever redder with embarrassment. Once he came over, Chad fled before he even spoke. Chad was afraid of Vincent. Oh, thank God. Vincent was awesome and was always in the lunchroom. I could just hang out near his anti-Chad force field. Vincent played World of Darkness with his friends in the lunchroom, and I had played all through high school. By proximity, I was eventually asked to join in on the game. I met with the storyteller Paul, and then gave him my character sheet. He informed me that I could keep whatever stats I had, but I would be taking over the role of Jenny, a long-standing NPC. I asked who Jenny was, but was only told I'd get a huge kick out of it, so I attended, waiting for him to introduce me to the team. They were playing the game in a seedy strip club setting. Everyone looked bored but Paul and a player named Bill, who were both wrapped up in the ordering of a pen and paper hooker. I didn't know Bill, but he was huge and creepy, with an intense, unblinking stare that was always focused on either Paul or me. I start to get a bad feeling, and Paul announces Jenny the hooker has arrived to service Bill's character. He turns to me and grins lewdly. Bill's searing focus locks onto me. "I am not playing a hooker," I yell, and Paul looks crestfallen, and Bill looks enraged.
"Dude, just let her play the bartender,"
Vincent sighs when Paul begins pressuring me. Paul eventually relents, sulking. I finished that game and showed up for one more, but Paul always insisted on sexualizing my character, and Bill just sat there across from me, breathing heavily and glaring. I quit the game. Bill started following me. He never spoke to me, just sat across the room from me, glaring and snorting, with Chad. They were friends. Of course they were. I had to abandon the cafeteria entirely, because while Chad was creepy, I was pretty sure Bill was dangerous, and he wasn't afraid of Vincent. Also, it looked like Chad was encouraging him to do something while they stared at me whispering. I ended up leaving the state at the end of the semester, but kept in touch with Vincent. About 7 years later, I married him. When I brought up all these crazy things that happened back when we met, he told me that actually everyone was afraid of Bill, especially Paul. They tried to disband the game because all Bill wanted to do was rent fake hookers. But he'd made vile threats that he might do something insane if they stopped playing with him. To this day, I think Paul was offering me to Bill, the same way you offer the crazy guy at the office a Snickers, just in the off chance that he does do something drastic. He won't do it to you.
I currently go to a small public liberal arts college on the west coast of the United States. I'm a freshman, female, and 18. I keep to myself mainly, but I have a few close friends here, one of whom will be an important part of the story. All was well for the first few weeks of college. I went to all my classes, did my work, and went on interesting adventures. And then one day, I met Matt. Matt's one of those people who you can tell there's something off about them just by looking at them. He always has this weird glint in his eye and always looks like he hasn't showered in a week. Anyway, I'm sitting in the campus meal hall all by myself, minding my own business and enjoying a chicken sandwich when Matt plops himself down beside me. Now, while I may be an introvert, I still consider myself a friendly person, and I attempted to make conversation with him. He just asked me a bunch of weird questions, like my exact schedule, and stared at me awkwardly. I was increasingly feeling uncomfortable and therefore pretended I had class to get to, and promptly left the place. For the next few weeks, the situation would occasionally repeat itself, and as I'm a bit of an extreme doormat, I would entertain his odd ramblings until I got uncomfortable enough to excuse myself and go elsewhere. Hey, maybe this guy just needed friends. And then it got weirder. Every weekend, our college puts together a modified version of a game called Humans vs. Zombies, which is basically a big Nerf gun and foam sword fight. It's tons of fun and a good workout, so I go when I have a chance and energy to do so. One week, Matt showed up. Let me make this clear. Matt is one of those people who despises all physical activity. Humans vs. Zombies is something that would be incredibly low on the list of things Matt would want to do. Matt awkwardly asked for my phone number, then asked me out, both of which I politely refused. Thankfully, we split off into separate starting groups, but he would always just happen to run into me for the rest of the night. It was very obvious he was following me. I stopped going to Humans vs. Zombies after that. Then, I decided to join the anime club at the request of my friend James. So I do, and for the first few weeks, everything is cool. It was weeaboo free. The president liked to bring in her kitten occasionally, and everyone was pretty nice. We were even planning an anime convention and taking volunteers for it. Then, Matt shows up to a meeting. Matt does not watch anime. He sat next to me and launched into his usual ramblings and weird questions, which I ignored while pretending to be engrossed in my copy of Pokemon X. James showed up and I immediately jumped to him, pretending I needed to ask him something. Matt signs up to volunteer at the convention, but doesn't really attend meetings after that. And when he did attend the night before the con, he spent the whole time complaining about the shifts he had been given. Convention day rolls around, and as a volunteer, I was not in cosplay. My job was to go around and make sure everyone was behaving themselves, and that cosplayers in full body paint had remembered to seal it before arriving. People were mostly tame. The only incident of note was that I had to get some Assassin's Creed cosplayers down from a bridge because they had climbed up there for a photo op, and if they had fallen, we would have gotten in trouble. I decided to sign up for the Pokemon X and Y tournament they were holding. I got in free since I was working at the convention. So did Matt. To be fair, this one was probably because he liked Pokemon too, but he was still creepy to me while he was there. I ended up taking 4th place, and Matt was knocked out in the 2nd round of the tournament. Around the 6th or 7th round, Matt asked me why I was still hanging around if I had already been knocked out. I replied that I was still in the tournament, and he flipped out. He insisted I was lying, saying things like, "Why would you still be in the tournament? You don't ever want to battle me." As if a non-willingness to battle meant I was a terrible trainer. I didn't have the heart to tell him that I never wanted to battle him because I thought he was creepy. They called me up for the semifinal and he promptly shut up. I lost that round, sadly, but it was a damn close fight. I spent the rest of the convention wandering the dealer's hall and doing my shifts, which were pretty much watching over anime rooms while like 5 people watched the first few episodes of a popular anime. I didn't see Matt again for the rest of the day, and when I brought James his lunch while he was on duty, he informed me that he was working a double shift because Matt had left in a huff after the Pokemon tournament. James gave me a bottle of mango soda for my trouble, and I went about the rest of my day. Things went normally for a few weeks. Matt kept happening by me while I was alone, and I kept brushing him off. And then, while James and I were having lunch, Matt rudely inserts himself into our conversation. He just sits down at our table without even asking. James and I are both sick of Matt's shit by now. I give James a pointed look and talk about how awful it is when we are confronted by people who just won't take hints, making it seem like I was continuing a previous conversation. James gets the hint and joins in with me. Matt gets angry and calls me heartless, insisting that I should just give guys a chance sometime. The fact that we were both talking about him goes right over his head. After that, I don't see Matt until after spring break, which just ended last week. James and I, along with our mutual friend Megan, are enjoying lunch together when James, who is sitting across from me, alerts me that Matt had just entered the meal hall. I'm like, forget this, and decided to go hide out near the waffle irons to wait for him to go away. While I'm there, I make the first waffle I was ever able to make in one of those things without the batter sticking to the grids. So that's good, I guess. I decided the coast must be clear by now, so I wander back to the table. I was wrong. Matt was standing there, talking to James. Matt hadn't seen me yet, so I just kind of bolted away in the other direction towards the dishwasher. I hid behind a wall there and nearly knocked over a girl trying to put her dishes away. I explained that I am hiding from a dude who won't take a hint, and she gives me an understanding nod and goes on her way. Eventually, Matt leaves, and I return to the table. The first thing out of James' mouth when I sit down was, "He was asking about you," to which I give a little shudder. James had told him to go away, which Matt had done, but angrily. That night, I had a craving for popcorn, But with 4 boxes of microwave popcorn and no microwave, I had a problem. Thankfully, the combined campus mailroom and lounge has a microwave, which I've made frequent use of since arriving here. It was pitch dark out, but I've always felt safe walking alone on campus at night because it's well lit and campus police patrols around a lot. I go to the lounge, pop my popcorn, and start to head back down the path to my dorm when I hear a familiar sound behind me. One thing I forgot to mention about Matt is that he's literally always pulling a rolling backpack behind him, so his presence is always announced by the sound of rolling wheels. I turn around, and lo and behold, there's Matt behind me, pulling his backpack. He's about 30 feet behind me and just looking in my general direction. Normally, I'm just creeped out at Matt, rather than terrified of him, but it was dark, and we were alone. I book it to my dorm and run inside, and lock the door to the room behind me. I don't know if he chased me or not, but I sure hope he doesn't know which room I live in. I haven't seen him since. Maybe I was being paranoid at the last one, but I didn't want to take any chances. I intend to take this up with campus police and/or security if this continues.